Hello and welcome to the Film Ireland podcast. I'm Gemma Creagh and I'm chatting with Gary Lennon about his documentary Piano Dreams. And thank you so much for chatting with us.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
God, it's such a beautiful documentary. It's really observational in the sense that we're really brought into this beautiful world, but it's such an intimate one with parents and kids exploring something. There's a real, you're rooting for people to be successful, but it seems like the competition is against the odds. That there's so much on the line for people, and you really dig into the personal cost of everything, which is truly beautiful, but do it so deftly that we feel like we're being led in to see little secrets. So it's just a gorgeous documentary to watch, and thank you so much for making it.
No, thank you very much. That's very kind. I lived over in Shanghai for about 5 years, from 2000 to 2005. And I did a master's in Asian studies before that. So I had a good sense of Chinese culture. What really happened while I was over there was this explosion in piano. It's got like a pianomania is what I'd call it. And I think, there's a few different reasons for that. But from the outside looking in, there's about 80 million people now studying piano to a very high level. It's actually higher. The numbers are even higher than that. So it's actually kind of basically the population of Germany is studying piano to a really high level. And what I mean is high-end piano teachers teaching students. So it's really a remarkable situation that has never been seen in the world before. And the people that are driving it are this kind of most powerful, sector in the world, which is the Chinese middle class.
The competition is so intense. Like you really feel there's so much on the line, and there's real elements. I know that this comparison has been made before to Whiplash. I mean, one of your subjects, he's 8 years old, and his teacher is like telling him how if his grandfather wasn't in the room, he'd slap him. But yet there is an affection there, so it's not like as cold or intense as that. But it seems like it's just a very different rule than if you were here going to a traditional route.
It's different. And of course, we're at a different stage of development in Western Europe than China is. But when I was a boy, I was beaten by my school teachers. I'm in my mid-40s. I was hit by my school teachers. My sports trainers absolutely shook me and screamed at me and all of those things. So nowadays, that would be quite uncommon to see that type of roughhousing. And one of the reasons we actually picked this student was because his teacher wasn't like a normal pearls and twin set type of piano teacher. He was this kind of almost like a sporty guy, and a sporty coach in the way he presented it. But the family are unbelievably close with him, and his Chinese parents weren't like, "Oh, this is terrible." This is what you have to need. This is what you need to do to get ahead. Like the mum was in the room when he was saying that stuff, and she was saying, well, like the competition is so tough. This is what you need to do. So toughen up, dry your eyes.
And you do get the sense that, I mean, like as an outsider watching it, the level of skill and precision, these tiny young people, like they are just like 8 to 12. I know there's one like slightly older guy who's kind of on the cusp of becoming an adult, but like they're so skilled. So they are involved in competitions, and I don't want to give too much away because that's part of it, but they just don't place to where as maybe you think that they should. And there's such a disappointment in that. Could you feel the tension in the room, that the hunger for people to place as they're in those various different competitions that they're all in?
Yeah, definitely. It's so competitive there. It's when you have those type of numbers that are playing, you have to have that level of drive. It's when the standard, and this is one of the entries that I came into the film was that when I was living in Shanghai, there was this musical, like a cultural diplomatic visit from members of the Irish music world. And late at night, someone from one of the piano teaching areas, a lady in her early 60s, she just casually said to me, like, "These are the best I've ever heard." And I was like, "Oh, what do you mean on your trip to China?" And she's like, "No, these are the best I've ever heard." And she had been across every film shoot, so every piano contest in Europe for 20 odd years. Whereas for me, that was a real kind of eye opener because I didn't think, the Chinese pianists would be able to compete with the Russians and the Germans and the Americans and things like that. But what you see in the film is that, like, the world is being led now by China in terms of piano playing and even piano manufacturing. China is the center of the piano world. And what I tried to show is this kind of glimpse into the people that are really in the middle of it, these children and their families. And as I said, there's another 80 million of them that are doing something like that.
What was the process of this documentary in terms of getting funding? Because it was a while since you were there. Did you have to kind of renegotiate your way back in?
Yeah, well, in terms of funding, the funding was fairly, standard. We started off, we got some great support from Screen Ireland. Then we got support from Creative Europe. So we were selected for that, and that allowed us to go to China on some development shoots. And while there, we hired researchers and fixers to find some of the students. But, it is true to say that a lot of my contacts had moved on by that point. But, we spent the better part of 18 months doing that. So we met an awful lot of people. I used to live next door to the Shanghai Music Conservatory. So, like every single day that I'd open my window, I would hear them practice. So I knew this was like, this was it and the one in Beijing are the two best conservatories in Shanghai. So we spent a lot of our energies reconnecting with the Shanghai Conservatory. And then, in addition to that, in addition to the students that are going to the conservatory, two of the leading professors, the actual head of the conservatory and his wife, who's also a teacher there, they had a private school. So we had about 50 students there that we could focus in on. And then we also went to a lot of tournaments and competitions. So between the competitions and the private schools and the Shanghai Conservatory, that was how we kind of did our casting. So like it was a broad net, it was more than 100 pianists that we started off with. And then bit by bit, we worked it down till we had about five. And then we ended up choosing the three that you saw now.
And do you speak Mandarin? Would you understand it? Would you speak it fluently enough to understand everything that's going on and the nuances?
I wouldn't, but I do have a bit of Mandarin. I did study it in college and living in China, but I always did work with translators. And then during some of the period of COVID fixing, the co-director Richard Hughes is fluent in Chinese, so he was able to do any of those talks.
It's very intimate.
Yeah, there's a lot of. I think it's reasonable to say that people in the West would assume certain things about Chinese people, and that was one of the things that I really hoped to show in this. And that was, um, one is that there was a long bias against Chinese players as being very mechanical, and they would play by rote learning, and they wouldn't have the same feel for piano. But I think it's quite obvious that that isn't the case when you see the quality of the play. And then similarly, it would be often, a bias or a cliche would be that Chinese people aren't emotional the way we are in the West. But you see how, like I would say, much more emotional Chinese people are, because the pressures are so high. You've got four grandparents, two parents, and one child, and all of their energies are focused in on this one child. And China isn't like Denmark. Things don't work incredibly smoothly and with full transparency. And you have these people, and we try to show the sacrifices that they made. The mothers especially like left their jobs, they left their families, they left their hometown, and they've given up all of this. So you can imagine how worried and tense and pressurized that is. And then you're also talking money, like you're talking about $500,000 to do this. So it's really this intense pressure pot, which is where, you see the families crying constantly on camera because they're just so, it's such an emotional thing for them. And then also the culture of China is that like Chinese friends don't really share those things with each other. So it was really like actually a big opportunity. Like the only person they would really talk to about this was the camera crew, the film crew, the director or the co-directors. And this, at the end, the eldest boy, Yuang, his mum was saying, every time I see you guys, I start crying. So, and that's true. And, it happens with all, each one of the female characters is crying at different points and, I remember when I showed this cut to my dad first, he was like, I never thought I'd see a Chinese person cry like that. But they don't stop crying at all throughout the film at different places. And also, just anecdotally, like in China, you would see much more demonstrative crying of like teenage girls than you would in the West, because you would see much more, in work scenarios, you would see people cry a little bit more than you would here. But that isn't kind of the expectation here.
Are you heightenedly aware, like, okay, I don't fully grasp these beautiful moments that I'm going to capture, or like all of it, but I know there's something like, is there an instinctualness to how you capture them?
I think so. I think you you have a sense of what I would do is I walk into every room with a plan, but if something comes out better in front of me, I just go with it. That's the very simplistic approach that I take. And I think, when you see those two, like Yuang's mum is a force of nature, like she really is like a powerhouse. And when you see her sparking with the people, those organizers that you mentioned there, it's a reasonable enough thing to just keep on following them with the camera, because you think something's going to happen. And, she really doesn't hold back a lot of the time, and we really we had to we didn't want to just show that about her all the time because she's actually underneath it all. She's just a very she's just incredibly driven, like, the first time we met her, she told me that like when she listened to Richard Clayderman, which sounds a little bit cheesy to our ears, but like, in those days, you couldn't get classical music the way you can nowadays. But she was saying that Yuan used to just bounce about in her belly all the time. And he would only do it when he heard piano music. So she was like, I knew he was destined to be a piano player. So fate plays a much bigger part in Chinese culture than it does over here. And I just thought that was kind of a charming introduction to why she decided. And also, like, she wanted to do arts, but they didn't have those opportunities in those days. So it's not a question that she's trying to be like a tiger. Well, she's not trying to be like a tennis mom, trying to make her fortune on the back of her son, but rather she never had these opportunities and he really wants to do it. And that's what we try to, with a lot of determination, that's where they've got to.
You really feel like the three acts and, the household, the learning, then the household, and then the big performance elements. Was that always a narrative that you had in your head from pitch? Or was that something that is like, especially those kind of intimate scenes when you're maneuvering around, or was that something you found as you were shooting?
One of the, it did change substantially from pitch. And one of the, what we did have was much bigger emphasis on scale. So like the first time I went to Shanghai, like we were at the world's biggest ever performance of grand pianos. So like we had the children with 120 grand pianos and, it was a world record. And then they had invited us back the next year for the launch of Shanghai Disney. So again, that was going to be like 250 pianos. So again, but actually then COVID kicked in and then just they really reduced the scale of public performances. So we actually kind of used a kind of a disadvantage as an advantage, which we just spent all of the time with them in their houses because that's what their lives are like. Like they're eating, which is a huge part of their culture.
And it looked amazing. Their food looked so good when you were watching.
It is amazing there. Like it's so it was very hard to edit that, like because I remembered all the amazing dinners they had, and they obviously incredibly generous. Just a couple of them just happened to be particularly good cooks as well, even by Chinese standards. But the food is breathtaking there. It's there's nothing we can compete with it in Europe, unfortunately. So what you see is a much more intimate film. It's in the apartments, and it's that real closeness, and they were wonderfully generous in their terms of their access that they gave us. There was really no restrictions. They allowed us to go to their hometowns as well, in the apartments in Shanghai and all that goes in between it, backstage before competitions, in the hotel rooms. They were really incredibly generous.
And do you think that that kind of shift helped develop that intimacy that we do see on screen in terms of like, was that kind of a blessing?
I think I prefer it as a film because I think a lot of the spectacle would have been very spectacular, but perhaps less interesting after a while because it would have just been yet another big showpiece. So I'm happy with the way it panned out. But I think we'd have probably had an easier time selling it around the world if there was more spectacle for people to kind of get their teeth into. So there's kind of pluses and minuses of it, but I do. This is a film that's set in the world of pianos, but ultimately this is a film about mothers. This is a film about mothers' love, mothers' sacrifices, and what they'll do for their children.
Those dynamics are so beautiful that you capture. Is 12-year-old Ying?
Yeah, Ying is the girl, and yeah.
And when she's sort of telling her mom just to shut up because she didn't get the response. And obviously it's from a thing of pain, but you can see the pain in the mother's eyes and that interaction. Again, it's just so familiar. It's, like that is the teenage daughter dealing with disappointment.
It's a big time in her life as well. Like, you know, this is like she's going from a girl to a woman, and she's got a foreign camera crew following her around. And she's at the most stressful time in her life as she's trying to go from the junior school to the high school. And you've all of these familial pressures, her, you know, illness in the family that we talk about. So, you know, it was an intense time for her. And, you know, again, she doesn't sit there stoically like some little, you know, uh, the perception that all Asian women are like geishas, which is obviously a different country, but you know, you can see they're like fire rockets a lot of the time.
Oh yeah, like and real, but I think there's a real charisma in different ways. The 8-year-old is so kind of like charming, but laser focused. I think one of the most interesting moments was when he was talking almost about how the physics of the mechanical elements of the piano work and the different sounds and cleaning the dust off, where you just get like his brain is his tiny, his young, it's not tiny, obviously it's enormous, but his young brain is like processing all those little elements and taking them into consideration, like, you know, at our age when we're falling off bikes and you know, figuring out how to do rudimentary maths.
Yeah, and again, there's an element that, you know, we're from a country of, you know, whatever number, 5 or 6 million in the Republic. You know, what we're focused in on some of the best of 1.3 billion. Like these are outstanding talents. They're outstanding people. They've also outstanding academically outside of music. Ying Ying was an athletics champion as well when she was younger. Like they're just, you know, the best of 1.3 billion. You can't really compare it with you know, the best of 7 million. You know, so at the island of Ireland, let's call it. So these people are, you know, just breathtakingly talented. You know, like for example, I in a moment or two in between shoots, I played this game with Ying Ying, which is a game that we always played as teenagers, or it was, you know, called clapsies when they hit your hand and try and hit you. And she hit me 47 times in a row without missing. So I very I very quickly was put in my box as to, you know, who I was dealing with and my levels by comparison.
And but what is sort of extraordinary and that hammers home this other level where they're operating at is how like the rejection she faced was pretty severe like midway through, and it's, you know, and it's about her like kind of taking a step and regrouping from that and planning again, where, you know, like she doesn't get into the school that she was hoping for and doesn't place at that level, and you're going, actually you really feel like that there's a lot to lose.
Yeah, yeah, there is. And, you know, there's emotionally a lot to lose. There's financially, you know, you're talking about $500,000, which is a lot of money. That's all the costs that it'll be for the family to leave. But it's also the hopes and dreams of their family. You know, this is their only child. This is the only child of 3 generations. So if they don't work out, that's it for the family. So, you know, we complain about our leaving cert stress. This is another level entirely.
And okay, so you're over there filming there. How like would you have blocks where you go over and film all three? Would you have crews that you work with over there? How does the process of shooting this work?
Yeah, a combination of the two. So we had blocks where we would follow just one student for a while, and then we would have other blocks where we would be, because they all did, so two of them did live in Shanghai, but then the youngest boy, Sha GT, he didn't live in Shanghai. He lived south of there. So we would have to go there for longer extended trips. But then in addition to that, we did go to the other two characters' hometowns. So there was hometown shoots and then Shanghai shoots. And then sometimes they were in competitions in different parts of China. So we followed them to different places. So we had a mix. We had a mix is how we did it.
Were you able to get coverage of everything that you needed to? Was this something that you could always plan, or were there things that maybe you missed or that you had to cheat?
No, we didn't have to cheat. We didn't have to cheat, because that would be dishonest and unethical. But in terms of, you know, we had access to them as you saw in all of their houses, and so we're able to do that, and we're able to, you know, a lot of work from the team went into getting access to these competitions and into their homes and things like that, and into the schools. So with that in place, we didn't have that issue of about not following things and not being able to have things. So that allowed us to get all the coverage we needed.
And were there any stories like were okay, so the three that we see on screen, was there anybody else that maybe almost made a cut and didn't?
Yeah, no, definitely there was another character who didn't like me to use her Chinese name. She wanted to be only called Kelly, and she was a rare talent, but she ended up moving to New York really on a whim, as far as I could make out. But she ended up moving to New York with her mum, and they went to um, the famous Juilliard School in New York. So that was halfway through the production. So for obvious reasons, she had to fall out. We had a number of really good and interesting characters, but as with all of these things, you have to make a decision, and we were kind of happy enough to the ones we went with.
And in terms of most of them were very, very, very classical. So I presume there wasn't a lot of clearance, the rights
Yeah, it
to.
was. It was all classical, and so that allowed us to do that. And then we had the recording rights because it was us recording it. So that allowed us to do it. So we didn't, because there was so much piano playing. I didn't have a separate score on top of that because I just thought it would have been overwhelming for the audience. But yeah, so in terms of those rights issues, that allowed us to do that way.
Would you have had to go around and get waivers from everybody there, or would you have agreed with organizers to get like a blanket waiver?
A combination of the two. So if you're in a room with kind of less than 15 or 20 people, we would go around to every single person and we would get waivers. But if you're having a performance, like so, for example, at one of the competitions, there would be hundreds of people in the audience. The procedure is that you put up signs saying that this is being recorded, and anyone that you can clearly see, we will try and get waivers for, and that's the way we approach it. So all the performers, all the hosts, we had all waivers for them.
Was there any kind of pushback or anything like that? Was everyone very happy that, like that their wheelhouse was being filmed? Like some people might just if you're at a performance be like, I don't want my child filmed. Can you like was there any pushback in terms of maybe that
Oh,
we
no, quite
wouldn't expect from?
No, quite the opposite. Like everyone was dying for their daughter or son to be in the film, so they would constantly approach us asking for them to be selected rather than try and get them removed at all. Yeah, so it was very charming to see that and quite amusing.
In terms of sort of putting together the final edit, would you do a test run in terms of viewing it with people and show it to the subjects first before you'd kind of lock a cut?
I wouldn't do it with the subjects necessarily. Rather, I would do it with people, kind of industry friends, colleagues, people's whose opinion I kind of liked. So we would have done a couple. We hired a couple of cinemas for private screenings to get kind of feedback that way. And then also, then just a very practical element of European filmmaking is that you've got different financiers involved. So those commissioners give you feedback. And in our case in Ireland, it was Celine Haddad from Screen Ireland that gave us some really good feedback. And we were also working closely with Arte and ZDF in Germany, so they gave us some really good notes as well. So a combination of those kind of industry colleagues. I've done loads of training courses, so my friends that I've met from Europe, I've sent them cuts and they've given me their feedback, and we kind of all push that into the pot. But ultimately, if you ask 10 people, you'll get 10 opinions. So you have to be careful about asking too many people. But if you ask the right people, you have to listen to them, and because they often have some really good notes. But at a certain point, the producer, the director, and the editor just have to go for it, and that's what we did here.
And working with a co-director, what would your workflow be like on a project like this? Would you both be around all the time? Would one person be more overseeing editorial? Like, do you have different sort of roles within that one role that you'd oversee?
Yeah, every project is different. On this particular project, there were certain travel restrictions for large parts of the filming, so I wasn't able to go to China. So essentially, what we would do is we would sit around together and talk about what was happening in the coming days and weeks. We would plan out a shooting schedule. We would secure all of the access that we need, and then we would get the rushes back. And then I was the only one that was in the edit. So it was myself and Cara that were in the edit. And then the co-director in China wasn't involved in that. He gave notes naturally enough, but it was Cara and myself in the edit. But then for the filming over in China, as that period of restrictions was in place, he did the filming.
And in terms of how long from the beginning of pre-production into your final kind of edit lock, what would the length of time you'd be looking at it actually being in production before?
Yeah, it was about 18 months.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay,
And then
that's
and then there was a couple of years of financing it. So yeah, so it was, yeah, it was, I think I wrote my first application in 2015 15 or something like that. So it's a long process, and that unfortunately is the nature of the industry.
So, and was that because you were working on Castro's spies at that moment? Was it like, I'm in the process of shooting that and I'm just trying to get my next one up and running?
And no, I had largely done the Piano Dreams one. We did lock that before Castro
Oh.
Spies. So, we were, yeah, no, able to work on it. Yeah, and it's quite normal to have multiple projects happening simultaneously. And when you have those kind of big, long lead-in times, you have to always, especially like with a Cuban and a Chinese project, you have to have just a bit of kind of contingency for time that allows you to come in and out.
And in terms of from when you lived there to when you started the application process to get for funding, like when was it something you always knew you wanted to film or document, or was it something that sort of creatively grew over time in your mind?
Yeah, I wasn't working as a documentary maker when I was living there. I was working as a writer, but it was a striking thing for me. I would hear living next door to the conservatory, every single time I opened my window, I would hear them. I would see them from dawn till dusk every single day of the year. You would see this kind of just huge big explosion in coverage on televisions there of piano competitions, and piano players were coming and they were like movie stars the way they are in the West, or like pop stars, whereas obviously like people really could only, most average person on the road could probably only name one or two piano players in the West. But it's not like that over there. So it was something that I was very aware of, and I had hoped to do it. But yeah, I was working with the producer Ray McCormick on it, and like really dug down into it, and that's how we started off the process. But it did start. Yeah, as I said, the first application was in 2015, and yeah, we picture locked in 22. So it was a chunk.
And since then, I mean, in you hear the young subjects say it's about 2021 for the bulk of your shooting. So it's been 3 years. Do you stay in contact with them? Have you shown them the film now it's out in the world?
Yeah, they've seen it at this point, and we know where they are in the world. And without wanting to give away the storylines, they're really thriving in the piano world at the moment. It's reasonable to say that some of them are better than the others, but yeah, we do keep in contact.
And are they delighted now that they're getting a little bit of celebrity?
Yeah, they are. We're really hoping for a bigger release in China, and that's something that we're working on at the moment. But yeah, they loved it. It's like it's such a dream for them to be covered in a documentary, especially by some foreigners, that it was yeah, it was a great experience.
And because of the international nature of the content and the creative team, how do you find distribution has been now? So we're getting your Irish releases coming up. I'm sure people are very excited to get to see that. Do you like just say there's a big expat of Chinese people in say North America, especially in Canada and things like that? Do you feel like it resonates with them, or is it like, or what's the feedback from, even you probably get a taste of it from the festivals, even if it's not released there?
Yeah, no, we had a nice festival run a little while ago, and then we also had some release is as you say in Northwest Canada for the Pacific Coast, and then we also we pre-sold the film to different channels around Europe and North America as well, and we have an international distributor, Met Sales. So between all of those things together, we've had a good mix and some really good results in terms of our sales. So really happy with it, how it's gone. It's been really well received, and we're just really hoping to get a bit more in China actually.
Brilliant. And is there anything that surprised you that like that it really resonated maybe with a community or region that you hadn't necessarily thought from the get-go?
Well, I think it was quite one of the things that at the very start of it was quite, we had a little bit of pushback from male commissioners. And it was interesting that every single woman that we spoke to just got it instantly. But like a lot of the decision makers were men. So we had this kind of interesting dynamic at the start of it. And we didn't craft the film after the event because of that. But I couldn't but notice this, that we would have this pitch and we would talk to female commissioners and they would love it. And then their some cases bosses would block it or say no to it. So that dynamic was a tricky one for us. But I suppose thankfully there's more women making decisions nowadays. So we were able to get it financed. But it was very obvious how that was kind of how the sex had different opinions of it at that early stage of the commissioning. And I had never experienced that before in anything I've worked on.
And is that, I suppose, it's just something like Castro's Spies? It's very like, yes, like, I mean, it's the conflict is there. Like, it's high octane. There's a war. Like, there's no, like the selling points are very clear. But something like this, that's more like a d domestic, which is almost like a slur to say things are two women. But it's about, the internalized, the familial. Is that the element that you think was the harder thing to sell?
I think it was a case of that they weren't sure how, they just felt it was more, they felt it was too personal almost, which is a contradiction in terms, but it was, and then in other cases they were saying, well, we've done other Chinese things, so we can't do another Chinese film. So when you're having those conversations again and again with men, it was quite eye-opening to see how it was. But that was one of the things that we experienced of it, but that would be the main thing I was surprised by during the production.
Is there anything now maybe that you would have learned in this? Because it is a very different film from Castro's Spies in terms of
Yeah.
content and narrative structure.
Yeah, it's what we had hoped to do. I think when you're doing a film across, is that you have to really prepare in advance to the nth degree because you can only have so many shoots when you're going across continents. I think that's one of the things that you have to take out of it. But I think the other element of it is that um, there's much more of an interest in authentic voices nowadays and I would feel, it's interesting when you talk to different people, be they commissioners, they were very, very concerned about the fact that you had two white guys talking about middle class Chinese life. So that was one of the pushbacks that we had over the course of it, and I'd like to think we answered some of those concerns in the final film.
Yeah, like it would be something that I'd sort of be aware of, but that didn't even strike me at any point during this because it was,
Yeah, like I certainly didn't have an agenda going in, and you can see the access that we had. It was absolutely, we were in their homes, and we are sitting at the piano table, we were sitting at their dinner tables. So it wasn't like we were, Richard, the co-director, has been living there for 20 years. I lived there for 5 years. It was like it is something we were very familiar with. So, I was, but it was that's part of the filmmaking world at the moment, and I do understand that you have people coming in parachuting into places and with various different biases that they have. But I think that yeah, I know. I just felt we had a very sincere reaction from the family, and their openness and their happiness with it, I think helped us to do it.
yes. And I do think maybe things like that apply more if it was a like an immigrant person in the West rather than what you're doing is just providing an outsider perspective in their world where you where there's hierarchy or colonialism or
Yeah.
patriarchy within the system that you're a part of where you have more power than them would I kind of think in this that I wouldn't personally see that as being a problem.
Yeah, it was just something that was said to me by at different film festivals. So I've answered the question so many times.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of an interesting discussion point as to, what films can you make and who can make them. And of course, there's a long history to get to this point, but I certainly don't have all the answers myself. But it was a real privilege to work with these families.
It's so wonderful to watch it. I think that's the thing as a viewer, and what I was so surprised with coming out is the warmth and empathy and just the kind of relatability of this completely alien world to anything that I'm used to and the structures of it, but how at the end of the day, like, a stressed, caring mum who's giving out to their kid about studying more is a stressed, caring mum, no matter no matter what the content.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's obviously there's huge cultural differences, but at the same token, this as soon as you travel, you can see that people are people, and we all recognize the different people in this film, I think.
And it's beautiful. So, well, best of luck on your release. Are you doing any Q&As?
Yeah, we're doing a week in the IFI with a Q&A this Friday, and then we're releasing it in Cork down at the Arc on the Friday, the 31st of May, and then it's going to be released in the QFT in Belfast, and the Palace in Galway, and the Lighthouse later on this month as well.
And actually, is there anything now? Like I'd be interested because there's such different films. Is there anything now that's on the slate that you're working on? Are you going to take a nice big long break and enjoy the relaxation after this?
No, no, certainly not. Like everyone else, I'm working away busily. I'm very fortunate enough that I have a couple of things in production at the moment. One of them is a documentary on George and Kencho, who was shot by the Garda in Blanchardstown in 2020. And another project is a very different one in tone, which is on a rainforest in Beara in southwest Ireland. A man called Owen Daltoon, over the course of 14 years, took kind of a waste scrubland and created Ireland's most impressive rainforest.
So
So a different tone across those three.
across everything. So let me just get like, so you've gone from like an interesting historical analytical piece to an almost an observational warm human story to a activist political, like local political story, and then an environmental documentary. So
Yeah.
that's a very rewarding slate.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's great. And hopefully, yeah, it's what keeps me interested and it makes coming into work on a Monday very easy.
Well, we look forward to watching all of them. So
Thanks,
well
Amelia.
done and good luck.
Thank you very much.
So if you liked this podcast, like and subscribe, or even better, visit filmireland.ie and subscribe to the newsletter so you can get them delivered straight to your inbox.